The scene at the gate was already tense. As the passengers boarded, a quiet ripple of whispers spread through the crowded terminal. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. In the midst of it all stood Maya Davis, dressed in a simple black jacket and dark jeans, her face calm but her eyes sharp, scanning the scene with practiced ease. She didn't look like someone who would be subjected to scrutiny. But today, that assumption was about to be shattered. The gate agent, a young woman with short blonde hair and a stern expression, looked her up and down as she approached the counter. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong section," she said coldly. Maya didn't flinch. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter, and without a word, she handed over her boarding pass, the words, "First class," clearly printed on it. The gate agent hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the ticket. "This seat is reserved for premium customers. Are you sure this is yours?" She didn't look up, her voice dripping with condescension. Maya's calmness only seemed to irritate the agent further, but she didn't answer. The gate agent handed the boarding pass back, her voice a little louder. "Now I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. I need to confirm your details." Maya's patience was thinning, but she remained silent, her mind working. Asterisk, asterisk. "Wait, what's happening here?" Asterisk, asterisk. A bystander whispered to their companion. "Did she just get called out like that?" The agent turned now, speaking with a colleague. "She doesn't look like she belongs in first class," the agent muttered loud enough for Maya to hear. The words were casual, dismissive, but Maya's ears perked up. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just about seating. This was about something far worse. Asterisk, asterisk. Would you let them treat you like this? Would you walk away or stay and let them unravel their own mistake? Asterisk, asterisk. The tension escalated as the gate agent, now visibly annoyed, asked Maya to step aside, calling for security. The surrounding passengers began to murmur, eyes darting toward the unfolding drama. But just as the agent walked away, Maya made a simple call. "Activate Protocol 7, she said calmly into her phone. Within minutes, the assistant was already taking action. The agent's attitude shifted, but it was too late. A few moments later, the agent returned, now speaking with a tone of forced politeness. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry. There seems to have been a mistake." Maya stood straight, unyielding. "A mistake? Or did you just assume?" she asked, her voice cutting through the room. Maya slowly pulled out her diplomatic passport, revealing her identity. The agent went pale. The room stilled. The revelation was a shock, a cold slap to everyone who had witnessed the treatment. But for Maya, it was just another example of how people were quick to judge based on nothing more than appearance. As she walked past the stunned agent and toward the gate, her phone buzzed. "The report is in. We're ready." Maya nodded, her eyes never leaving the agent. It was clear now justice was not just about who had power, but about who was willing to use it when necessary. The gate agent looked down, her face flushed with embarrassment as security walked past, ready to follow Maya's instructions. The crowd, still in shock, remained silent, but Maya knew this moment would change everything. Asterisk, asterisk. "You think this is the end? Wait for the next move." Asterisk, asterisk. The scene at the gate was already tense. As passengers boarded, a quiet ripple of whispers spread through the crowded terminal. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. In the midst of it all stood Maya Davis, dressed in a simple black jacket and dark jeans, her face calm but her eyes sharp, scanning the scene with practiced ease. She didn't look like someone who would be subjected to scrutiny. But today, that assumption was about to be shattered. The gate agent, a young woman with short blonde hair and a stern expression, looked her up and down as she approached the counter. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong section," she said coldly. Maya didn't flinch. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter, and without a word, she handed over her boarding pass, the words, "First class," clearly printed on it. The gate agent hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the ticket. "This seat is reserved for premium customers. Are you sure this is yours?" She didn't look up, her voice dripping with condescension. Maya's calmness seemed to irritate the agent further, but she didn't respond. The gate agent handed the boarding pass back, her voice louder now. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. I need to confirm your details." Maya's patience was thinning, but she remained silent, her mind working. Asterisk, asterisk. "Wait, what's happening here?" Asterisk, asterisk. A bystander whispered to their companion. "Did she just get called out like that?" The agent turned now, speaking with a colleague. "She doesn't look like she belongs in first class," the agent muttered loud enough for Maya to hear. The words were casual, dismissive, but Maya's ears perked up. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just about seating. This was about something far worse. Asterisk. Asterisk. Would you let them treat you like this? Would you walk away or stay and let them unravel their own mistake? Asterisk. Asterisk. The tension escalated as the gate agent, now visibly annoyed, asked Maya to step aside, calling for security. The surrounding passengers began to murmur, eyes darting toward the unfolding drama. But just as the agent walked away, Maya made a simple call. "Activate Protocol 7, she said calmly into her phone. Within minutes, her assistant was already taking action. The agent's attitude shifted, but it was too late. A few moments later, the agent returned, now speaking with a tone of forced politeness. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry. There seems to have been a mistake." Maya stood straight, unyielding. "A mistake? Or did you just assume?" she asked, her voice cutting through the room. Maya slowly pulled out her diplomatic passport, revealing her identity. The agent went pale. The room stilled. The revelation was a shock, a cold slap to everyone who had witnessed the treatment. But for Maya, it was just another example of how people were quick to judge based on nothing more than appearance. As she walked past the stunned agent and toward the gate, her phone buzzed. "The report is in. We're ready." Maya nodded her eyes, never leaving the agent. It was clear now justice was not just about who had power, but about who was willing to use it when necessary. The gate agent looked down, her face flushed with embarrassment as security walked past, ready to follow Maya's instructions. The crowd, still in shock, remained silent. But Maya knew this moment would change everything. Asterisk. Asterisk. You think this is the end? Wait for the next move. Asterisk. Asterisk. As the gate agent walked away, Maya stood still, her eyes locked on the agent's retreating figure. The air around her seemed to freeze for a moment, the murmurs of the other passengers fading into the background as she considered her next move. The agent had just assumed that she didn't belong, but Maya knew better than to let such an assumption slide. She had seen this before too many times to count, being judged by her appearance, dismissed because of the color of her skin. It was a familiar feeling, one that she had fought against for years. But now she was no longer just a passenger. She was in control. As the agent disappeared into the back office, Maya calmly pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant. "Activate Protocol 7, she said, her voice even, and composed. Within seconds, she could hear the familiar voice of her assistant Carla on the other end. "It's ready, ma'am. We're moving forward." Maya hung up the sound of the call, ending echoing in her mind. It was time for the agent to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Maya didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout or demand an apology. All she needed was for the truth to come to light. Minutes later, the agent returned, this time with a different demeanor. Her posture was more rigid, and her voice when she spoke was laced with forced politeness. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry for the confusion. It appears there has been a mistake." Maya remained calm, her eyes not leaving the agent's face. "A mistake," she repeated, her voice sharp but controlled. "Or did you just assume?" The agent hesitated, her gaze flickering for just a moment. It was enough. Maya could see the doubt beginning to creep in, but she wasn't done yet. With a slow, deliberate motion, Maya reached into her bag and pulled out her diplomatic passport. She opened it carefully, revealing the official seal. The agent's eyes widened in shock as she took in the sight of the passport. The room seemed to hold its breath as the revelation sunk in. Maya was no ordinary passenger. The agent stammered her words, failing to form at first. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. Maya didn't respond right away. She let the silence hang in the air for a beat, letting the weight of the moment settle over them all. The other passengers, who had been watching the scene unfold, now turned their attention to the agent, and Maya, sensing that something monumental had just shifted. The tension was palpable. Maya stood there, unwavering, her presence commanding the space around her. Finally, she spoke, her voice clear and resolute. "This is why people like you shouldn't make assumptions about others. You thought you could dismiss me based on how I looked, but now you see who I really am." The agent, now visibly flustered, could hardly meet Maya's eyes. She stepped back slightly, as if trying to distance herself from the gravity of the situation. Maya gave a small, controlled nod, signaling to the agent that the moment was over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. As she turned to walk toward the gate, her phone buzzed again. Carla's voice came through once more. "The report is in. We've logged everything. We're handling it." Maya's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Good," she said quietly, her voice steady as she continued to move forward. The agent, still in a state of disbelief, stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Around them, the passengers remained silent, some still looking at Maya, others at the agent. The feeling of justice in the air was thick, almost tangible. As Maya walked away, she could feel the eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. This was just the beginning, and she had made her point. The world would not underestimate her again. Not today. As Maya walked down the jet bridge toward the plane, she could still feel the eyes of the passengers on her. Some looked away, quickly embarrassed by what had just unfolded, while others remained fixed on her, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. She didn't pay them any mind. The moment she stepped into the plane, the familiar hum of the engine and the cool air inside grounded her once again. She found her seat in the first-class section, her ticket finally validated, though she didn't need it to be. It wasn't the seat she was after. What she wanted was something far more significant: justice. She took her seat by the window, letting out a long breath as she settled into the plush chair. Her phone buzzed once again. It was Carla. "Ma'am, the escalation has been logged. The team has been notified and the airport is already starting their internal investigation." "We've got this covered." Maya nodded as she listened, her mind already shifting gears. "Good. I want the full report by the time we land," she said, her tone calm but commanding. The conversation ended quickly, and Maya leaned back, her eyes briefly closing, as the sound of the plane taking off filled the cabin. But her thoughts were racing. She had dealt with this type of bias before countless times. It wasn't new, but today felt different. Today, the rules had changed. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the one in charge, the one dictating the narrative. Maya's journey wasn't just about personal victories, it was about sending a message to everyone who ever assumed they could dismiss her, degrade her, or deny her what was rightfully hers. She had fought for every inch of ground she stood on, and today she had reclaimed more than just a seat on a plane. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Maya felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see the flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes, standing beside her. "Excuse me, ma'am, but there's a call for you at the back." "It's important," the attendant said. Maya's brow furrowed slightly, but she nodded and followed the attendant down the aisle. As she reached the back of the plane, the flight attendant handed her the phone, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am," the flight attendant said before stepping away. Maya picked up the phone, her pulse quickening slightly as she heard Carla's voice on the other end. "Maya, the agent who initially questioned you has been suspended effective immediately. The entire team has been pulled for retraining, and the airport is conducting a thorough investigation into their actions. We've also made arrangements to file a formal complaint with the FAA. Maya didn't say anything at first. She was still processing the gravity of the situation. She hadn't expected things to move this quickly. "What about the other passengers, the ones who saw everything?" Maya asked, her voice steady but firm. "We've reached out to them. They're willing to testify about what happened," Carla replied. "This will make a real impact, Maya. You've already set a precedent." Maya's lips curled into a small smile as she turned back toward her seat, feeling a sense of accomplishment settle over her. This wasn't just a victory for her, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked or underestimated. She knew there was more work to be done, but this was a start. As she returned to her seat and sat down, she gazed out the window, the world below growing smaller as the plane soared higher. Maya had done more than just assert her rights. She had begun a movement, one that would ripple far beyond the confines of this single moment, and she knew this was only the beginning. As the plane cruised through the skies, Maya allowed herself a moment to breathe. The tension of the past few hours began to ease, but the weight of what she had done still lingered in her mind. She had made a statement, one that would not be easily forgotten. It wasn't just about getting a seat on a plane or even having the agent apologize. It was about standing up to years of systemic bias, about showing that people could no longer get away with treating others as though they didn't matter. As the plane headed toward its destination, Maya's phone buzzed once again. It was Carla. "The media is starting to pick up on the story, Maya. There are a few outlets asking for statements." Maya's expression remained neutral as she listened to her assistant. She had expected this. The incident at the airport was already causing a stir, and now the world was starting to take notice. "Let them talk," Maya replied calmly. "But we won't say anything yet. Let's see how the investigation unfolds first. We control the narrative, not them." Carla hesitated for a moment before responding. "Understood, ma'am. I'll handle the press inquiries, but the timing will need to be perfect." Maya nodded to herself, thinking about how this situation would play out. It wasn't just about a personal win. This was about making sure the message got across to those in power, to those who thought they could get away with prejudice. She wasn't just a victim of bias. She was a force, and the world was starting to see it. The hours on the flight passed in a blur as Maya watched the clouds outside her window, her mind focused on what lay ahead. The world of business, politics, and power she inhabited had always been competitive and ruthless, but today had shown her the true power of patience and composure. It wasn't always about making a spectacle. It was about knowing when to make your move, and ensuring that when you did, it was a game changer. By the time the plane began its descent into the city, Maya's resolve had only strengthened. She had made the right decision to remain calm, to not let the gate agent's ignorance affect her. But the truth was, this was only the beginning. Maya had an empire to build, and while she had just proven that one person's judgment could be turned on its head, the larger battle for fairness, equality, and respect was just beginning. The plane touched down, and Maya felt a sense of anticipation rise within her. There was no time to waste. As soon as she disembarked, she was going to take charge of her own narrative. She would be the one to decide what the world would say about her. And with that decision came the understanding that her every move, her every word, would now be scrutinized even more closely. But that was fine with her. She was ready. As she stepped off the plane and made her way through the airport, Maya didn't glance back. The gate agent, the passengers who had watched, and the world that would soon follow, none of them mattered anymore. Maya had already proven that she could handle whatever came her way. She had claimed her power, and it wasn't going anywhere. The future was hers to shape, and she would shape it on her terms. As Maya walked through the terminal, the weight of the situation seemed to lift with every step she took. She had done what she needed to do, asserting herself in a way that would resonate far beyond the confines of this airport. But there was no time for celebration. The real work, the long-term impact, was yet to come. As she approached the baggage claim area, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Carla Times. The news is escalating. The investigation has expanded to include several other complaints against the staff at that airport. Our legal team is preparing a statement. Maya didn't have to read between the lines to understand what Carla was saying. This wasn't just about one gate agent. It was about systemic issues that needed to be addressed. Good times, Maya texted back. We will take control of the narrative. Keep me updated. Maya wasn't sure what the fallout would be, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't back down. She had already set the stage for real change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race. As she stood waiting for her luggage, Maya's thoughts drifted back to the plane ride, to the quiet confidence that had settled over her. It was rare for her to feel so composed in a high-pressure situation, but something had shifted in her. The fight was no longer just a reaction to one individual's prejudice. It had become a symbol of something much larger. The voices that had been silenced for far too long were now being heard, and Maya was the one to amplify them. As her suitcase appeared on the conveyor belt, Maya's phone rang again. It was Carla. Maya, the press conference is scheduled for this afternoon. I've briefed the team. We've lined up the key points. It's time to make sure the world knows what happened and how we're handling it. Maya nodded, as she listened, though Carla couldn't see it. I'm ready, Times. Maya said, her voice steady and clear. We will speak the truth, and when we speak, it will be loud enough that no one can ignore us. The decision to address the media wasn't one Maya took lightly. She knew the spotlight would be on her, and the scrutiny would be intense. But this was more than just defending her actions. This was about showing the world what happened when someone stood up against systemic injustice, when they refused to be silent in the face of discrimination. Maya knew that her words would carry weight, and she was prepared to bear that responsibility. As she walked through the airport's exit, stepping into the bright sunlight outside, Maya's resolve only grew stronger. This moment had been a catalyst. There would be more challenges ahead, but she had shown herself and the world that she could face them head-on. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning, and Maya was ready to lead it every step of the way. By the time Maya arrived at her downtown office, the storm had already begun to swirl online. Every major outlet had picked up the story of the gate agent incident, as they were calling it. Hashtags were trending, comments were flooding in, and reporters were parked outside her building. Maya had seen this kind of attention before, but this time it felt different. This was not about a product launch or a corporate deal. This was about principle, identity, and power. She walked through the glass doors of her headquarters with the calm authority of someone who had already made up her mind. Her team was waiting for her in the boardroom. Carla stood at the head of the table, her tablet in hand. "The press conference is scheduled for 3 o'clock, she said. "We've already received over 200 media inquiries, and the statement draft is ready for your approval." Maya took the tablet and scanned the text quickly. It was polished, professional, and safe, but that was the problem. She looked up at Carla. "This sounds like a corporate apology," she said. "That's not what we are doing. I don't want safe. I want real." Carla nodded understanding immediately. "Then we'll rewrite it," she said. "You want to speak from the heart." "Exactly," Maya replied. "This isn't just about me being profiled. This is about every person who's been told they don't belong. This is about changing the standard." The room was silent for a moment as the weight of her words settled in. The team knew what was at stake. This was not a publicity stunt. This was a defining moment. Maya handed the tablet back. "We are not playing defense," she said. "We are setting the record straight." Carla's phone buzzed. She glanced down, her expression tightening. Maya, the gate agent, just released a statement through her lawyer. "She's claiming she was following protocol and had no discriminatory intent." Maya let out a slow breath, her tone steady. "Of course she is. They always say it's about protocol. But we both know what really happened." She turned to the large screen on the wall where news feeds were playing side by side. Some commentators defended Maya's composure. Others questioned whether she was overreacting. It was the same tired debate, one she had watched play out too many times before. "Prepare the conference room," she said quietly. "We are going live in 1 hour. I want this recorded and streamed." Carla blinked. "You want to go live without a script," Maya nodded. "People need to see my face. They need to hear my voice. We are not hiding behind statements. We are leading with truth." Within the hour, the lights were set, the cameras ready. Maya stood behind the podium, her reflection staring back from the glossy surface. The hum of the equipment faded as the director gave the signal. She looked directly into the camera and began. "For years I have walked through doors where people assumed I did not belong. Yesterday was not new. But yesterday was different because this time the world was watching. This is not about anger. It is about accountability. We can do better. We must do better." Her voice was steady, powerful, and unflinching. Every word carried weight. When she finished, the room was silent. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. Then Carla whispered, "That was perfect." Maya exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave her shoulders. She had said what needed to be said. The truth was out there now, and nothing could silence it. As the press conference ended, Maya felt an unusual calm settle over her. The pressure of speaking the truth, of standing in front of a crowd of reporters, was now behind her. But the world was still watching. The story had exploded across the internet, and social media was flooded with reactions. Supporters hailed her bravery, while others, as expected, tried to discredit her. Maya knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Later that evening, she stood in front of her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her phone buzzed again. It was Carla. "Maya, the CEO of Summit Wealth Bank, called." "They want to have a conversation with you," Carla said, her voice steady but with a hint of curiosity. Maya turned away from the window, her thoughts racing. Summit Wealth Bank. That was the bank where the gate agent worked, the same one that had denied her service just days ago. "What do they want?" Maya asked, her tone neutral. "They want to apologize. They're offering a formal meeting. They want to make things right, at least publicly," Carla replied. Maya took a deep breath. She had expected some sort of response, but this felt like more than just a corporate apology. It felt like an attempt to regain control over the narrative. Maya had no intention of letting that happen. "Tell them I'll meet with them tomorrow," she said decisively. "But this won't be a meeting for them to cover their tracks. I'm not interested in token apologies. They need to understand why this matters." Carla paused, sensing the gravity in Maya's voice. "Understood," she said. "I'll schedule it for tomorrow afternoon." The next day, Maya walked into the high-rise of Summit Wealth Bank, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. She had dressed in a simple, sharp black suit, the same one she had worn to her company's last major board meeting. She wasn't here for show, she was here for accountability. As she entered the CEO's office, the air was thick with the unspoken tension of the moment. The CEO, a well-dressed, middle-aged man named Richard Harris, stood up from behind his polished desk. "Miss Davis, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," he said, extending a hand. Maya took his hand firmly, her grip unyielding. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice calm but with an edge, "I appreciate you taking the time to meet. But let's be clear, this meeting isn't just about making amends. It's about understanding the larger issue at hand. She sat down without waiting for an invitation, her posture commanding. You run one of the largest banks in this country, she continued. And yet your employees, one of them at least, believed they had the right to assume who I was, based on nothing but my appearance. That is a problem. And it's not just about a single incident. It's systemic. Richard Harris looked taken aback, his eyebrows furrowing as he processed her words. I understand, Miss Davis, he said, his voice suddenly more cautious. And I want to assure you that we are taking this matter seriously. Maya shook her head slightly. It's not enough to just take it seriously. You need to actively dismantle the systems that allow for this type of discrimination to occur. And that starts with acknowledging the power dynamics at play, the unconscious biases that fuel decisions like the one your gate agent made. She leaned forward, locking eyes with him. And if you think a simple apology will fix this, you're wrong. This requires real tangible change, starting with a public acknowledgement of what happened and the steps you'll take to prevent it from happening again. The room was silent for a moment as Richard Harris seemed to consider her words. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped, clearly unsure of what to say next. Maya didn't let the silence drag on. I've already spoken to the press, Mr. Harris. I've already made it clear that I'm not asking for apologies. I'm asking for change. If you want to regain trust, if you want this to be more than just damage control, you need to demonstrate that change publicly and in every action you take from here on out. Harris nodded slowly, still processing. We will take the necessary steps, Miss Davis, he finally said, though there was an underlying uncertainty in his voice. Maya stood up, her confidence unwavering. I'm holding you to that, she said firmly, turning to leave. This conversation isn't over, not by a long shot. The following days after her meeting with Richard Harris were filled with a mix of anticipation and action. Maya had made it clear to him that this was no longer just a conversation about one incident. It was a reckoning. She wasn't expecting a quick fix. Real change took time, and Maya was prepared for the long haul. As the story continued to unfold in the media, the pressure on Summit Wealth Bank grew, the public was paying attention, and now the company had to deliver on its promises. Maya's team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, preparing for the next steps. Carla had been in constant communication with Harris's office, pushing for transparency and demanding action. Every step of the way, Maya's resolve remained firm. She knew that the road to lasting change would be filled with resistance, but she also knew that resistance was an inevitable part of progress. One evening, as Maya was preparing for another round of meetings, her phone buzzed. It was Carla. Maya, it's official. Summit Wealth Bank has agreed to a full-scale audit of their hiring and training practices with an emphasis on diversity inclusion and anti-bias training for all employees. They've also agreed to create a public action plan within the next 30 days. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, though she knew this was just the beginning. Good, she replied, her voice calm but resolute. But we're not stopping there. This isn't just about one bank or one incident. This is about every institution that has allowed discrimination to persist under the guise of protocol. I want them to understand that this is a movement, not a moment. As the days passed, the media attention grew, and Summit Wealth Bank found itself under the microscope. The pressure was building, but Maya could see that they were starting to take the issue seriously. The board of directors had called a meeting to discuss the changes, and Harris had invited Maya to attend as a guest of honor. Maya agreed, but on her terms. She wasn't going to sit back and let them pat themselves on the back for what was in her eyes a minimal effort. When the day of the meeting arrived, Maya walked into the boardroom with the same quiet confidence she had displayed all along. Harris greeted her with a polite smile, but Maya could sense the nervous energy in the room. She had been clear from the beginning this wasn't going to be a show for the media. It was time for real accountability. As the meeting began, Harris took the floor and outlined the steps Summit Wealth Bank had agreed to take. He spoke of diversity goals, improved training, and the bank's commitment to rectifying the situation. Maya listened attentively, but she wasn't moved by the words. She had heard all of this before in countless other corporate boardrooms. It wasn't enough to talk about change. It was time to take action. When it was her turn to speak, Maya stood up slowly, her presence commanding the room. I appreciate the steps you've outlined, Richard, she began, her voice steady but firm. But let's be clear. This is not enough. This is a start, but it's just a drop in the ocean. What we need is a complete transformation of the way this institution operates. We need to go beyond training. We need to create systems that prevent discrimination before it even begins. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. What I want to see from Summit Wealth Bank is a long-term commitment to dismantling systemic bias, not just a reaction to one incident. The world is watching, and if you truly want to change, it won't happen with just a few surface-level adjustments. There was a long pause as Maya's words hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Maya didn't flinch. She had already said what needed to be said. The room finally erupted into a discussion about the specifics of Maya's demands, but Maya knew that the real work was still to come. She had planted the seed. Now it was time to see how far they were willing to go to prove that they were truly committed to change. The days following the boardroom meeting were filled with tense anticipation. Summit Wealth Bank had promised to take action, but Maya knew better than to believe in quick fixes. Words were easy. Real change took time and commitment. She kept her distance, focusing on her business and personal projects, but she was watching closely, waiting for the bank to prove they were serious. The media storm had calmed, but the underlying pressure remained. Every move Summit made was now under a microscope, and Maya was determined to keep that pressure on them. One afternoon, she received a call from Carla. Maya, the first phase of the bank's diversity and anti-bias training is complete. They've announced the launch of a new diversity initiative. The board members are speaking out about the changes they're making. Maya's face remained impassive as she listened. "Is this progress?" she asked. Carla hesitated before answering. "It's something, but it's not the overhaul you asked for. They're calling it a new era, but there's still a long way to go." Maya's expression tightened. "Tell them it's not enough. A press release doesn't fix anything. I need to see real actions, not just words." Carla paused. "Understood. I'll handle it." Maya hung up the phone, a sense of urgency building inside her. She knew that this was a critical moment, one that would define whether the bank was truly committed to change or if they were just going through the motions. She had to ensure they didn't get away with simply checking boxes. Maya had always been a strategist, and now it was time for her to make her next move. Over the next few weeks, she kept pushing, staying in touch with Carla, and making sure the bank's actions were in line with their promises. Maya was not about to let them slide into complacency. The world was still watching. As the deadline for Summit Wealth Bank's public action plan drew near, Maya's patience was starting to wear thin. She knew that the time for waiting was over. The world needed to see more than a statement. They needed to see accountability. She decided it was time to take the next step. Maya arranged a meeting with Carla and her legal team. She was ready to take action, ready to push Summit Wealth Bank to make the kind of bold decisions that would prove they were serious. When the day of the meeting came, Maya walked into the conference room with her head held high. The team was ready for her, and she wasted no time getting to the point. "I've seen enough," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "Summit Wealth Bank is on the right path, but they're still not doing enough. I want to see a public commitment to change, not just another press release. We need to hold them accountable for every step they promised to take." Her legal team nodded in agreement. "We've been reviewing the terms of their commitment," one of the attorneys said. "There's room for more things they haven't fully addressed yet. If you want to push them further, we can take a more aggressive stance." Maya's eyes gleamed with determination. "Exactly. This isn't just about getting a few policies in place. This is about creating a sustainable institutional change that can't be undone. It's about leading by example, showing other institutions that this is how real change happens." Carla spoke up, her voice steady. "We'll need to prepare the right messaging. The media is still paying attention, and we can use that to our advantage." Maya nodded. "Let's move quickly. We'll be the ones to drive this narrative. The world is ready for real change. It's time for Summit Wealth Bank to prove they're ready too." The team got to work drafting a new set of proposals that would push Summit to do more. Maya wasn't going to let this moment slip away. She had already started a movement, and now it was time to see how far she could take it. She was no longer just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced or dismissed, and she wasn't going to stop until real lasting change was in place. 2 weeks later, the day of reckoning finally arrived. Summit Wealth Bank had completed their 30-day deadline and released their highly anticipated public action plan. The report was detailed, polished, and filled with promises, but Maya had learned long ago that words on paper meant nothing without accountability behind them. She sat in her office with the sunlight streaming through the windows, the city humming softly below as she flipped through the document. Her eyes scanned every line, her mind analyzing every vague phrase and corporate platitude. Carla entered quietly, holding a cup of coffee. "It's live," she said. "The media's already dissecting it. They're praising the effort, calling it a step forward. Maya looked up, her expression unreadable. A step forward is fine, she said slowly. But what I want is transformation. They still don't understand that this isn't about public relations, it's about responsibility. She closed the folder and leaned back in her chair, thinking. Set up the call with Harris, she said. It's time we talk face to face again. Later that afternoon, the call began. Richard Harris appeared on the screen, his tone cautious but polite. Miss Davis, I hope you've had a chance to review our report, he began. We've made significant progress, and I want to personally thank you for inspiring these changes. Maya smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Progress is good, Richard, she replied, but let's be clear, you're not done yet. You've written a lot of nice words, but until those words turn into measurable results, this report is just a press release. Harris nodded, the tension visible in his posture. I understand, he said carefully. We're committed to following through, good, Maya said, because this conversation isn't just about your company anymore. Other corporations are watching. The world is watching. You've set a precedent, and if you fail to live up to it, the consequences will be bigger than either of us can control. Harris hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. You know, Miss Davis, he said quietly, when this first began, I thought it was just a public relations issue. But now I see it's much bigger than that. You've forced us to look at ourselves, to question the systems we thought were fair. It's uncomfortable but necessary. For the first time, Maya saw something real in his expression, something beyond the polished facade of corporate diplomacy. That's the point, she said. Change doesn't happen in comfort. It happens when people are willing to confront what they'd rather ignore. Harris nodded again, slower this time. We'll keep moving forward, he promised. And if you're willing, I'd like your continued input as we build on these initiatives. Maya considered his words carefully. She had no desire to be a token consultant, but she also knew that influence came from being inside the room where decisions were made. If my involvement ensures that real change happens, she said, then I'll be there. But understand this, Richard, if you ever slip back into old habits, I will call it out publicly. I'm not here to protect your image. I'm here to protect integrity. Harris gave a small, respectful nod. Understood. As the call ended, Maya felt a quiet satisfaction, but not victory. The fight was far from over. She knew that people like Harris would need constant reminders that institutions built on old power would resist change at every turn. But now there was momentum, real, undeniable momentum. She looked out the window again, the glow of the city lights reflecting off the glass. For the first time in a long time, she felt something deeper than anger or vindication. She felt hope. The kind of hope that comes not from winning a battle, but from realizing you've begun to change the entire field of play. Months passed, and Maya's influence only continued to grow. Summit Wealth Bank had taken significant steps in implementing the diversity and anti-bias training programs they had promised, and while the results were still being monitored, the transformation was clear. The bank had become a case study in how an organization could publicly confront its past mistakes and begin to make amends. However, Maya knew that this was only the beginning. True change wasn't just about one company. It was about shifting entire industries, communities, and systems that had been in place for far too long. The ripple effect of her actions reached beyond Summit Wealth Bank. Other corporations began to follow suit, implementing their own diversity initiatives and reevaluating their internal systems, but Maya wasn't ready to stop. She had a new vision now, one that went beyond merely pointing out the flaws in existing systems. She wanted to be the force that helped to build something better. Maya began speaking at conferences, writing op-eds, and meeting with leaders from different sectors. Her voice became a beacon for those who had been left out, ignored, or silenced by a system that favored the few. She was no longer just fighting for herself or for a single moment of justice. She was fighting for a future where people didn't have to prove their worthiness every single day. It wasn't long before Maya was approached by a national advocacy group dedicated to racial equity and corporate responsibility. They asked her to join their board and lead a new initiative that would focus on holding corporations accountable for their diversity practices and ensuring that real, tangible change happened. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. She agreed, knowing that this new platform would allow her to effect even greater change. The first project she tackled was ambitious. She wanted to create a nationwide standard for corporate diversity practices, something that would hold organizations accountable and force them to meet clear benchmarks. She worked tirelessly, collaborating with experts, lawyers, and activists, and slowly the framework for the initiative began to take shape. But Maya was no longer working alone. She had built a coalition of like-minded individuals, CEOs, advocates, and everyday people who shared her vision. Together, they lobbied for legislation that would require companies to disclose their diversity efforts, track their progress, and face penalties if they failed to meet certain standards. It was a battle that spanned months, even years, but Maya was unyielding. Every setback, every obstacle only strengthened her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for change, she was fighting for a new era of corporate responsibility. In the end, after a long and hard-fought campaign, the legislation passed. Maya stood in front of the podium at the signing ceremony, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. It wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, for everyone who had ever felt invisible. Maya had started a movement that had fundamentally changed how corporations viewed their responsibility to society. As she left the ceremony, her phone buzzed with messages. A text from Carla read, "You did it. You really did it." Maya smiled, her heart full, but her mind already racing toward the next fight. She had won this battle, but there were always more battles to fight, and Maya was ready for each and every one of them,